Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening episode of Pursue 6B. This is Liver Biopsy Interpretation Session 2. And with us, we have Dr. Raja Guru, who doesn't need any introduction. He's a postgraduate from postgraduate from PGI Chandigarh, a diplomat in National Board, and an specialist in GI and liver pathology. I would request Dr. Raja Guru to take over. Sir, please take over. Thank you.
I'll share my screen.
Yeah.
I would be requesting you to tell me about the comments. I will be having a small interactive session also initially. Hello?
We are waiting for your screen to come in.
Yes, yes, yes. Is it fine now?
Yeah, it's on the way.
Have you got it?
Yeah, you can start with the first slide.
Okay.
And before you start, let me tell you, we are live on YouTube as well, and there are comments in YouTube also which keeps pouring in. So in between the cases, if there are any specific comments, I will put it across so that the viewers on the Google Meet can also listen to that comment and listen to your answers to that comment. Is that okay?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Yeah, and your voice is absolutely clear. I hope other people in the Google Meet can clearly hear Dr. Raja Guru. Yeah, fine. Dr. Neeraj says yes, so please start. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Nadeem. And so since last session, we had discussed about so many pathologies in liver, the basics. So today we'll start with a case. Right now, what you're seeing is a liver biopsy of a 7-month-old child. And just give a look of this portal area and the hepatocytes over here, how they are looking. Just give a close view of the hepatocytes over here, then the portal area, and this is another magnification for you to see the bile duct like structures over here in the portal area, and see if these portal area are fibrotic or not. Is it collagenized or is it not collagenized? Are you able to see something within the lumen? And this is a trichrome. So how does the trichrome appear here and here? So with this, what is your probable diagnosis? This is a child, a 7 month-old child, infant, and what would be your probable, like if you are knowing the diagnosis, well and good, but if not, what will be the history probably? Is there any comments, sir?
You can show the pictures. Can go back and show the pictures if everybody wants to see them.
So please have a look at the hepatocytes here, the portal area, something within the bile duct-like structures. I think you can easily identify what this is. So I had given only very few causes of ductular cholestasis or cholangitis lenta, so cholangiolar cholestasis. Only few causes I had described last session. So think about that. And this area where you see this kind of anastomosing duct-like structures. So anything? Any diagnosis, sir?
Anybody would like to take a call?
So I've purposely hidden the history. Actually, it would be so straightforward. I just want to show you this, without knowing the history, how will you come to a diagnosis? Just for that purpose, to understand the pathology more clearly, I've just put it like this. Okay, so there is a next image. There is another case. This is a 2-year-old child, and here again you see a lot of cholestasis within the ducts, and see these anastomosing duct-like structures in a chained fashion, and these hepatocytes. Compare these hepatocytes with those in the previous image here. So you see a lot of changes here, but here you don't see any change. If there is anyone going to comment, or shall I go with the answer?
Just wait, just wait.
Yeah.
Anybody would like to make a comment? Yeah, Dr. Bala says CHF.
Yeah. Okay. Which Dr. Bala? Which one is the CHF? The first case or the second case? This is the second case.
Second one, he says CHF.
CHF. Yes, correct. And the first one is what probably what will be your diagnosis?
The first one, he says EHBA.
Exactly. So Bala is absolutely right. So the first case presented with the history of jaundice with intermittent pale stools since the age of 2 months, and the intraoperative cholangiogram showed no excretion. So just I wanted to show that apart from sepsis, which I had shown you in the table of cholestasis, how to approach the cholestasis, apart from sepsis, you will have ductal cholestasis in two conditions. One is ductal plate malformation, the other one is extrahepatic biliary atresia. So apart from that, very rare causes of large bile duct obstruction can cause intraductal or ductal cholestasis. This is another case. This is also a child. So this biopsy, this is a trichome which I have put in because I don't have a low power image of the HNE, and this is the high power image. So you see this kind of dilated, enlarged hepatocytes here, and trichrome showing mild fibrosis in the portal area, and also in the perivenular area there's some fibrosis. So anyone, how will you work up this case? Don't have to go in detail, just with the stain, what kind of stain you will do. What is your diagnosis, or if you have a differential diagnosis, what is your differential diagnosis?
Dr. Bala has a diagnosis. Actually, his audio is not working, so he's typing. Okay. It's glycogen storage disorder, plant-like cells.
Exactly. Oh, he's absolutely right. So the plant cell-like, the plasma membrane looks very prominent here, and the plant cell-like what we have in a chromophobe RCC, like that kind of cell we will get here. So this is a glycogen storage disorder, and here with the PAS, we are seeing this positivity. It's not so bright here. Maybe I don't know the reason, but it's absent with diastase. Since it's sensitive to diastase, it is lost with PAS diastase.
Dr. Shilpi
so shall we go on to the...
Dr. Shilpi Thakur also says it's glycogen storage.
Wonderful. Okay.
There is a question. Can I come in as a question in the YouTube?
Yeah.
Which is straight directed to you. Pratik Shivappa from YouTube, he's saying, sir, please tell us how to count portal tracts and what is the adequacy criteria of adequate portal tracts.
Yes, sir. This was taken in the last session. Should I repeat it again? Because we are going to have an extensive session today. So.
We can cover it in the end.
Okay, fine. So I'll go ahead with the So last session we had covered till the hepatocytes, the pathological changes in the hepatocytes. So before that we had seen the portal tract, and then the changes related to cholestasis. So now we'll be seeing a little bit about sinusoids. So we already seen that the stellate cell hyperplasia and the CSFTC with the vitamin A toxicity, we'll have stellate cell hyperplasia. Here in the sinusoids, if you see a lot of lymphocytes which are packed within the sinusoids, if they are not atypical, looking mature, like it's not a lymphoma like, then you have to think of acute hepatitis C infection if the serology is positive, or infectious mononucleosis, because if you don't have any other positive history, think of infectious mononucleosis and ask for history of EBV infection, something like that. And about this also is a quiz slide, so this will be quite easy. Is anyone willing to answer? So just a plain and simple, I have not put anything. I'm now going to describe this also. This is related to the sinusoid. So if someone is planning to comment.
Sir, amyloidosis.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's Dr. Bala. Last time we had seen the globular deposit, and you had rightly pointed out that time also, but you had asked whether why is it not linear. So this is a linear deposition of amyloid within the sinusoids, and this patient had, and usually they present like a cholestatic liver disease with elevated ALP. So these are the sinusoids are packed with amyloid deposition. Then we'll go on to necrosis. So first we'll start with spotty necrosis. So spotty necrosis can occur anywhere within the lobule. It's not specified to a particular zone of the hepatocyte, and here it involves a single or a few hepatocyte cells, and this area particularly is showing the spotty necrosis with collection of a few macrophages around the necrotic hepatocyte. It can happen with the autoimmune or any other viral hepatitis. Next is confluent necrosis. This is a perivenular area which is showing groups of hepatocytes which are necrosed. So this is called confluent necrosis. So first is spotty, then is confluent. And confluent necrosis is usually seen in the perivenular area or the zone 3. You do not see necrosis around the portal tract. There are only few causes like phosphorus and ferrous sulfate poisoning where a periportal necrosis can be seen. And in certain infections that will be mid-zonal, and in certain other infections like HSV, you will not have any zonal distribution. It will be kind of a hemorrhagic necrosis here and there. But for most of the liver-related pathologies, the necrosis will be in the zone 3. And when there are a group of hepatocytes which are necrosed, it is called confluent necrosis. And next, this confluent necrosis is highlighted with a trichrome stain. You can see this collagen which is staining the terminal hepatic venule. It's a large vein. And around this necrotic area is very loose, and it is faintly stained with the trichrome. So in such a condition, if the necrosis is a bit late, means more than 2 months or so, you will have some collagen deposition in the necrotic area. So in such a case, you will have difficulties to differentiate it from the fibrosis. So in such a case, you can use the Orson stain. So Orson stain will stain the elastic fibers. So here you see the normal elastic fibers in the portal area. Here again you see it. And whereas in the necrotic area, this is bridging actually with the terminal hepatic venule. It is a centroportal bridging necrosis. So you are able to see the absence of the elastic fibers with the Orson stain. Here, this is a cirrhosis for comparison, where you can see this blackish elastic fibers which are stained. And reticulin shows a collapse. So what do you mean by collapse? Usually it is very confusing when you take a reticulin stain in an acute hepatitis and you see that, you really get confused whether it is a necrosis or a fibrosis. But how to differentiate is that when a collapse happens in a necrosis, the fibers, the reticulin fibers, are not darkly stained. They are just looking exactly like those in the surrounding the normal hepatic parenchyma. So the similar kind of reticulin fibers will be here. Whereas in a fibrosis, the reticulin fibers will be more darkish stained or blackish stained. So with that you can differentiate. So next, coming on to this entity, panlobular necrosis. When do you call this as panlobular? When the entire lobule or the entire acinus is necrosed. So in a liver biopsy, in a wedge biopsy, you can easily demonstrate that. In a liver biopsy, if you see that in between two portal areas, a complete hepatocyte area is necrosed, you can call it as a panlobular necrosis. And this happens, when this happens, obviously there is going to be bridging necrosis. And I should say that in a necrosis, it is always only one way. It will be centroportal bridging necrosis, or portocentral bridging necrosis. It is never a portoportal bridging necrosis. Portoportal fibrosis can happen, but it can never be a portoportal bridging necrosis. It will be portocentral bridging necrosis. So please be clear with that concept also. And coming on to multilobular necrosis, when more than one acini are necrosed, it will result on to multilobular necrosis. The term is called multilobular necrosis. This is a H&E showing complete absence of hepatocytes. And in the previous session, I told you with the destruction of the hepatocytes, the stem cells gain a phenotypic or morphological appearance of a ductular structure. So that is what is seen over here in the trichrome also. And there is absolutely no staining because it is a very acute event here in this particular case. So there is no collagen deposition at all. So here, this terminal hepatic vedule is showing normal amount of collagen, which is normal for this state. And so we will move on to fibrosis. This is it with the necrosis. With the fibrosis, so this is a wedge biopsy of a liver, which is showing a septal portal area. And this is a normal fibrosis. This is no fibrosis of primary sclerosing cholangitis or any kind of a chronic hepatitis. So we have to know that what amount of collagen is normal for that particular site. So I think while talking about the types of liver biopsies, I was telling you about the type of biopsy is important because when a capsule is sampled, the subcapsular area might show more amount of fibrosis, and interpreting that as a bridging fibrosis or something like a stage 2 fibrosis is wrong. So you will have to cautiously interpret that. And this is a schematic diagram of nodular cirrhosis, cirrhotic liver. And if suppose a needle is put, where all it can be sampled, the possibilities of sampling. And the cirrhotic liver, the biopsies tend to get fragmented frequently. So if you put right here, what you will get is only the fibrotic structure. So there is not going to be any hepatocytes in this particular area. But still, to some extent, we can make a diagnosis. Here it is going to be quite obvious that the patient is having cirrhosis. But if it is like this case, if it is a macronodular cirrhosis, and the chances of sampling a macronodule is there, and in that particular case, we'll have to rely on the clinician because your biopsy might not show a proper cirrhotic nodule. It might be looking like an early cirrhosis or a bridging fibrosis, and in certain case, it might not be looking like a cirrhosis only. So certain things like a fragmentation of the biopsies and clinical correlation are to be considered while dealing with such a case. For an example, this is a micronodular cirrhosis where you can see this complete well-formed nodule formation. And going on to the special type of fibrosis which is happening in the liver. First, we'll start with the NASH fibrosis. So I think I'll be answering the question which was asked for the previous session. So initially, I'll start with the fibrosis in NASH. So what happens in NASH? It can be a perivenular fibrosis, which is the most common type, but it also can be periportal. So stage 1C of the NASH scoring, you can have a periportal fibrosis also, but usually it will be perivenular fibrosis, and the fibrosis is a slender quality. So you are able to cleanly appreciate the trichrome which is staining this fibrosis, so the collagen which is so slender in nature, and it is surrounding each hepatocyte. So this is called pericellular fibrosis. So perivenular slender fibrosis surrounding each hepatocyte, it is called pericellular fibrosis. When we come on to NASH, the quality of the fibrosis is a bit different. So here, apart from the other factors which I will features which I will tell you later, here please appreciate the difference. Here it is more dense and thicker. So a thicker and dense fibrosis is more common with alcoholic steatohepatitis. So this is the difference, main difference between both of them. So, what are the other causes of perisinusoidal and pericellular fibrosis, and what is the use if we are dealing with the steatosis case? And as I asked you a question last time, what is the genetic metabolic disorder which causes steatosis? Wilson's disease. And viral infection like hepatitis C virus genotype 3 and HIV virus can cause steatosis. In such a case, the pericellular, the trichrome stain will be really helpful to see if there is pericellular fibrosis or not. So that will be useful. And in cases of a chronic venous outflow obstruction, like in a case of cardiac sclerosis, or I mean to say, if there is an outflow obstruction of the hepatic vein, so that will cause kind of a pericellular sinusoidal fibrosis. And in certain cases of autoimmune hepatitis, there's a particular variant called the centrilobular necroinflammatory variant. So please be aware of this, because everyone would be knowing that autoimmune hepatitis has a classic portal plasma cell rich or a lymphoplasma cell rich infiltrate, which is producing interface hepatitis and ductal reaction and so on. But this one is supposed to be the earliest feature, and this can happen in the perivenular area, the zone 3 area, and you will see a collection of plasma cells, and that particular area may appear necrotic. So around that necrotic area, when the biopsy is done at a later stage, there will be fibrosis. So that can happen. And diabetic hepatoportal sclerosis will be non-zonal. In a diabetic patient, there are chances that the patient might get a hepatoportal sclerosis. It's very classic. I don't have an image for that. And there is another type called fibrosing cholestatic hepatitis. That happens with the hepatitis C virus or B virus infection with a high viral load. Usually happens in a transplant or an immunocompromised patient, where you will see a presentation like a cholestatic picture. They present like a cholestatic with a cholestatic jaundice, and the biopsy will show extensive fibrosis, and there will be a lot of pericellular fibrosis, a lot of ductal reaction, and this is another condition where you can find cholangitis lenta or ductal cholestasis. And the next, the last one will be hypervitaminosis A, which will produce stellate cell hyperplasia. Those are a type of myofibroblast. So you can get a pericellular sinusoidal fibrosis in hypervitaminosis A as well. And so if you're not able to get to a conclusion of what is the cause, you have to try to find out any medication, or is the patient a fitness freak taking more of carrot juice or something like that, or is he into some herbal agents where he's where the principal constituent seems to be a vitamin A. So we'll have to see for that as well. So coming on to the bridging fibrosis. So initially it starts as the fibrosis in the portal area or the perivenular area, and then it starts bridging. It can be a portal bridging or a portocentral bridging. This is a terminal hepatic venule which is bridging with a portal tract, and this is the portal area, this is the portal area, it is bridging. Actually in this case it is a well-formed cirrhosis. I just taken images from those areas which is showing bridging fibrosis. And the previous image which I've shown, I'm just showing it again. So you will have a well-formed nodule, and if it is a incomplete cirrhosis, this roundening of the hepatocytes will not happen. Instead, it will be very irregular, not the kind of the other type of. I'll tell about that later. But here it is so rounded and well formed. So whereas in a incomplete fibrosis, you will not find that kind of well-formed nodule like what you see it over here. It is kind of irregular over here. So this is kind of an incomplete cirrhosis or a bridging fibrosis. If it is a well-formed nodule, you call it as a complete cirrhosis. And the regenerative activity of the hepatocytes, maybe in some biopsies, most of the biopsies you will be able to find, but certain biopsies, the regenerative activity of the hepatocytes will be lost. So you will have to rely on the fibrosis only to call it as a cirrhosis or not. Then coming on to a special type of cirrhosis, that is the biliary cirrhosis, which can happen with any type of biliary tree problem. So whether it's a bile duct obstruction, chronic large duct obstruction, or a PBC or a PSC, you will get a portal fibrosis. So the earlier which I told you for large duct obstruction will be edema, ductal reaction, and neutrophils. This is the triad for large duct obstruction. But if it is chronic, it will develop onto biliary cirrhosis, where there will be a lot of collagen layover, and in PBC and PSC also this will happen. But what you can appreciate that this nodule is not like the nodule which I had shown you previously. That is why I was trying to show it to you again and again. So this nodule is so irregular, and it is like a jigsaw pattern. And but whereas here you are able to find a round nodule. Maybe this is a transverse section, so maybe it got cut over here in the other dimension. So that is why it is appearing nodular. And another important thing is that you will find only portoportal bridging. Your terminal hepatic venule will be fine within. And another feature is that a feature called halo effect, where you see this clear demarcation around this nodule, pale whitish demarcation is seen over here. So this is formed by edema and ductal reaction, which is classic for a biliary type of cirrhosis. So another type called mixed cirrhosis, biliary type and post hepatitis type. I don't have an image for that. This can happen in a case of a primary biliary cholangitis, where both types can be there. Yeah, I think I don't know if you had listened to me last time. I told that like the biliary type with portal predominant inflammation can be there, and the same patient can have a hepatitic pattern also. So in that hepatitic pattern, you might be able to find more of a rounded nodular cirrhosis, and in the biliary type, the hepatocytes will not show any regenerative activity. That is another point which I forgot to tell you, that the hepatocytes over here will not show any regenerative activity. It will be almost synonymous with the congenital hepatic fibrosis, where the hepatocytes were completely normal, and that is how you differentiate. And mixed cirrhosis with biliary and post hepatitis type can be seen with a primary biliary cholangitis. Next, there will be another question before going on to another section. This is a 32-year-old female with hepatomegaly with gradually increasing ascites. These are the first image where there is a lot of sclerosis within the sinusoids, dilatation of the sinusoids at certain areas with blood in them. This is again another image where there is showing that there is a lot of this hemorrhage over here. This is a terminal hepatic venule where surrounding that it is completely collagenized. Here again you can demonstrate in the trichrome. Any diagnosis for this in the comments?
Sir, acute and chronic Budd-Chiari syndrome.
Exactly. So a Budd-Chiari or a chronic venous obstruction can result onto this. So the next type of fibrosis, that is what I've just shown you there, and it can happen that in a cardiac cirrhosis, reverse lobulation can happen. That is because the terminal hepatic venule have got fibrosed with hemorrhages, which I shown you here. Terminal hepatic venule, surrounding that there is fibrosis. This is a core biopsy, so you'll not be able to see it properly. But whereas this is a wedge biopsy, or I think I don't know, it's an autopsy specimen, there is a lot of fibrosis in the surrounding the terminal hepatic venule, and there is bridging as well. But the portal tract will be normal. There will be no regenerative activity of the hepatocytes. So it will look as if the portal tract is in the center and the terminal hepatic lobules are in the periphery. So this is reverse lobulation. I hope you will be able to remember the schematic picture which I had shown you in the previous session, the beginning. So next we'll move on to the vascular changes which happens. So this I'm not going to discuss in detail, but for hepatic arteries there can be vasculitis, hemorrhagic, hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, amyloidosis can happen, and the portal vein non-cirrhotic portal hypertension, that is a non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis, where there can be a dilatation of the portal vein that can herniate into the parenchyma. That can happen. And sinusoidal pleosis hepatis, which is a non-specific and an incidental finding, which can happen with certain drugs and other causes. Then venous obstruction, which we had just shown a case, and nodular regenerative hyperplasia. I'll just briefly discuss about nodular regenerative hyperplasia. So this can happen because of sclerosis of the small portal veins or portal venous thrombosis, which will result in a reactive hepatocyte hyperplasia and kind of a variable ischemia. So radiologically, the liver appears as kind of a vague nodular, gives a vague nodular look, and it is quite easily picked up on radiology. I don't think so, it'll be difficult. And but when we get the biopsy, we'll have to look in for certain features. The causes are plenty, but what are the features we'll have to look in for? So here, what you are able to see that this portion of the hepatocytes, the cord pattern is completely lost. It is thickened, and the sinusoids are obviously here very much dilated. And here, what you see is a kind of a thinned out hepatocyte, which can show a normal single cord pattern also here. So what is happening that there is a regenerative activity in certain portion of the parenchyma, which is causing enlargement and atrophy of the adjoining hepatocytic cells. So this will give a kind of a vague nodular appearance radiologically, and even histologically you will be able to appreciate that. And here it is quite obvious in reticulin stain, so where you can demonstrate the normal reticulin pattern, or maybe it is a kind of a regenerative picture, so the cord pattern will be lost. But here there will be no fibrosis, no collapse, but you see that please compare the reticulin pattern over here and here. So this is the atrophic area of the hepatocytes, where it is just being compressed between this two vague nodularity of the hepatocytes. And another feature in the biopsy is that the terminal hepatic venule will be less frequently seen. We will not be able to find it out so easily. So there can be a, as I told you in the etiology, that there will be obstruction. There can be an obstruction. So this trichome, just to highlight that there is no fibrosis at all, and there is a lot of pleosis hepatis also. Now, I think all the pathological changes, I think it's over. I am not going to discuss much about that. So we'll go to the other challenges what we face while reporting histopathology, liver histopathology. When is a liver biopsy performed? I think I've told about the indications earlier, but we'll discuss in much in detail now. So in an acute hepatitis, if the viral markers are negative, suppose if it is a hepatitis A virus infection, they're not going to do a biopsy. Even for the other hepatitis B and C virus infection, if it is acute, they're not going to do a biopsy. Maybe later, for the staging purposes, they will be doing a biopsy, staging and grading. Next, if the infection, that is a hepatitis A virus infection, is protracted, it's not resolving even after 6 months to 9 months, then they do a biopsy to exclude autoimmune hepatitis, which I'll be discussing about that later. And then in cases of autoimmune hepatitis, these conditions I'm discussing under acute hepatitis. What are the causes of, what is the reason for biopsy in an acute hepatitis? So autoimmune hepatitis, when they suspect a drug-induced cause, and in metabolic conditions like Wilson's and hemochromatosis and so on. Others, so in steatosis, steatohepatitis for grading and staging, when it comes to NASH, in alcoholic liver disease, they do not prefer a biopsy when the history is so classical. But if the patient is hiding the history, they're not going to come to a conclusion clinically. And if there is something else suspected along with alcohol, like viral or drug, they will be doing a biopsy. For an undiagnosed chronic liver disease, to know what is the etiological factor, and for grading and staging. In chronic hepatitis, for grading and staging. in all cases of cholestatic liver disease, if it is a clinically diagnosed obstructive cause, then I don't think so they will be doing a biopsy. But in all cholestatic liver disease, including autoimmune liver disease, PBC and PSC, they will be doing biopsy. And post-treatment AH, that is autoimmune hepatitis, to see for the resolution. So these are the conditions. So I'll briefly speak about autoimmune hepatitis. So autoimmune hepatitis in histology is all about demonstrating the interface hepatitis, the lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate or lymphocytic infiltrate, emperipolysis, and rosette formation. And I told you there is a particular variant called the centrilobular variant where you will not be able to find the interface hepatitis or a lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate in the portal area, but you will be finding in the zone 3 or the perivenular area. So that can be there. So there is a simplified scoring for AAH where you give scores for each of the antibody positivity. For the ANA or ASMA, more than 1:40 titers is 1 and 1:80 is 2 points, and so on for the clinical criteria. And for liver histology, if you have only interface hepatitis, that is with the presence of lymphocytes or lymphoplasmacytic cells, you give 1 point. That is called the compatible with AAH. If it is typical, you need to find interface hepatitis, emperipolysis, and rosette, and you will give a 2-point score. And if it is probable, the score is 6, and it is 7. If it is a score of 7, then you give it as a definite AAH. And as I told you, if you are able to find only the centrilobular necrosis and inflammation, you have to speak to your clinician and get all the details, complete details. If the initial antibody workup is negative, you have to go in for the other antibody markers. And there is quite a good number of 20% of cases which can be antibody negative also. So if the clinician feels so, he can consider and treat the patient as autoimmune hepatitis. Then going on to primary biliary cholangitis, you will be all knowing that the PBC is more common amongst the women, and so common that it is 9:1. And AMA is positive in near about 90 to 95% cases, and IgM is elevated. When you take autoimmune hepatitis, it will be IgG. Here it is IgM, and the stages are florid duct lesion, where the ducts will be inflamed with the reactionary ATP, reactive ATP of the epithelial cells, with granuloma formation, which might not be seen in most of the portal tract. In very less percentage of the cases, we will get a typical granuloma. Then is the ductal reaction in the periportal hepatitis, then bridging fibrosis, and then cirrhosis. These are the stages. And if you remember, I had shown you the use of CK7 and staining with the copper and copper associated protein, that is rhodanine and orsin stain, to highlight the presence of copper in the periportal hepatocytes and the positivity of CK7 in the periportal hepatocytes, which is seen to correlate with the stage of the PBC. So for increasing stages, the positivity for the CK7 increases. So if it is only restricted to the periportal hepatocytes, it will be in stage 1, whereas in cirrhosis, the whole nodule, cirrhotic nodule, might be CK7 positive. But I should say that while using copper associated protein, not any condition causing cirrhosis can show periportal hepatocytes with copper and copper associated protein. So we'll have to be cautious while using orsin or rhodanine, that in case of cirrhosis, because the periportal hepatocyte for any cause of cirrhosis can show positivity. But if cirrhosis is not established, a cause of chronic cholecystitis will cause accumulation of copper and copper associated proteins in the periportal hepatocyte. And then the biopsy is not very much important again in this case, like alcoholic liver disease. If the patient is having a positive antimitochondrial antibody and has a cholestatic biochemical profile with elevated ALP more than 1.5 times the upper limit of normal, and if the AST is less than 5 times the upper limit of normal, you don't need a biopsy. It is required only if there is it adequate or not, then the architecture, whether there is disarray or distortion, then if there is a portal expansion with fibrosis or inflammatory cells, then is there inflammation, and what kind of inflammatory cells, bile ducts in that area, whether they are present, is there a ductal reaction, is there interface hepatitis, then anything with the portal vein and artery, there will be too much in very rare causes, but still you have to see for that. In the lobules, whether steatosis is there, how much percentage of steatosis, ballooning, then necrosis, apoptosis, and so on. And about cholestasis also. Then the other findings which we have already discussed. And then after that, you give your additional features. If you have any additional features, you can give that. Then your final impression and the comments for the clinician in such a case. So we'll go to the pattern of liver injury. So after giving the list of findings which you are able to see in the liver biopsy, you will have to come to a pattern of liver injury. Whether is it an acute hepatitis, where you will be able to see the lobular predominant inflammation. There can be a portal inflammation in an acute viral hepatitis, mainly in the any kind of acute viral hepatitis, be it hepatitis A, B, or C virus infection. And in particularly in the hepatitis A virus infection, there can be a lot of cholestasis. Also in E virus infection, you can have a lot of cholestasis because of the damage to the excretory apparatus in the hepatocytes. There can be a lot of cholestasis. So you will have to have a complete clinical history first of all, and then you say that it is a compatible with acute hepatitis, hepatocellular predominant or lobular with lobular inflammation. And if it is virus related, there is no trouble. Then if not, then you have to consider Wilson's or drug-induced liver injury. If you are able to find a portal predominant inflammation with at least even a little bit amount of fibrosis, which you can pick it up in a trichrome or a reticulin stain, then it is a chronic hepatitis. So in hepatitis, hepatotrophic viral infections, autoimmune hepatitis, and certain drugs also can cause a chronic hepatitis pattern of injury. And then biliary type of injury, which we had been discussing just now, the PBC-PAC or the large duct obstruction. Then fatty liver disease, whether it's a ALD or alcoholic liver disease, or is it a non-alcoholic fatty liver. If it is fatty liver, you have to think in terms of Wilson also. If there is supporting clinical evidence, or if there is something like an acute hepatitis along with the fatty liver disease, and there is no perivenular fibrosis. If there is so much of lobular inflammation, ballooning, so much of ballooning you are able to find. There is so much of lobular inflammation with lots of Mallory hyaline, neutrophilic satelitosis, but still you are not able to find perivenular fibrosis. Then you have to think of something like a Wilson. And in the case of a fatty liver disease, you are able to find cholestasis. Then you have to think in terms of alcohol or drugs. And certain drugs can also cause a fatty liver disease kind of a picture. And as I told, pigments and deposits, you will have to exclude. And in certain cases, it will be a near normal biopsy. So when you are going about before that, I just want to finish off here that in an acute hepatitis or a chronic hepatitis, you are not able to come to a conclusion of the etiology. You can give it as your working diagnosis that consistent with acute hepatitis, and what are your possibilities, or consistent with the chronic hepatitis, and you have to grade and stage the chronic hepatitis, and what are your possibilities for this condition. And if it is a near normal kind of a picture, so what you will have to consider. So first you have to take a complete clinical history. So
you have to take your case file or have a extensive talk with your clinician as on what kind of picture he is thinking about, and then you have to see in for steatosis mainly in the perivenular area that can be very subtle. I told you about the microvesicular type, which is more grave, and those will be in the perivenular or more diffuse and can be missed out in a HME. So you can make use of the PAS stain to pick up that, and subtle cholestasis, which you will have to band cholestasis, which can be very subtle. So you will have to make use of the pearl stain. The other bile stains which are available, I don't think so. No one uses that. So the pale kind of counter stain with the pearls, the iron stain, you can use that. Then consider hemocytosis also. You can find out with the special stain. Then do a copper stain if there is nothing. If there is a lot of copper or copper associated protein, you can ask the clinician to work up for that. Then look for ground glass inclusions. That is in a case of a chronic hepatitis B viral infection. I'll have to tell you that presence of ground glass hepatocytes in a hepatitis B virus infection in a liver biopsy indicates that the patient is having chronic hepatitis. So it can be an occult infection and clinically present like an acute hepatitis, or maybe just a there are no features on imaging, or clinically there is nothing with mild elevation. But still, if you are finding ground glass appearance, then you have to call it as a chronic hepatitis and grade and stage accordingly. Even if there is no inflammation, say there is like maybe a grade of 1 out of 80 according to HAI, but still you have to call that as a chronic hepatitis. And then look for alpha-1 antitrypsin globules, which can be picked up with the diastase stain. And the ducts, bile ducts, the previous session I had shown you a case of vanishing bile duct syndrome. So looking closely for the bile ducts, if you want, you can use a CK7 to highlight those. And sinusoids, look closely for any deposition, stellate cell hyperplasia that can be missed out and confused for a steatosis. And PAS, diastase positive macrophages. In a near normal biopsy with mild elevation of the liver enzyme, the patient might have a resolved acute hepatitis or a resolved viral infection. So if you look in for that, you can give the comment as a resolving acute hepatitis or a resolving hepatitis, like that, and ask for the viral markers and other clinical parameters. So to approach for a neonatal biopsy, I think this is not. I think I'll just skip this. I think we don't need this for now. It's going to be there. You want, you can use a CK7 to highlight those. And the sinusoids, look closely for any deposition, stellate cell hyperplasia that can be missed out and confused for a steatosis, and PAS, diastase positive macrophages. In a near normal biopsy with mild elevation of the liver enzyme, the patient might have a resolved acute hepatitis or a resolved viral infection. So if you look in for that, you can give the comment as a resolving acute hepatitis or a resolving hepatitis, like that, and ask for the viral markers and other clinical parameters. So to approach for a neonatal biopsy, I think this is not. I think I'll just skip this. I think we don't need this for now. It's going to be there are a lot of slides. So I'm having a quiz slide again here. 45-year-old male with moderate elevation of ALT and AST and elevated alkaline phosphatase and GGT. So this is a liver biopsy here. You see the hepatocytes, this large vacuoles over here, and this one, these ones over here with something inside, and this is a portal area, it's a fibrotic area. And the more closer view of these structures, these rounded pink structures over here, and looking closely as these are multinucleated or trilobed inflammatory cells, and this is the trichome stain showing a classical pattern of collagen deposition.
So anyone with a diagnosis in this case? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Is someone answering?
You're waiting.
Sir, alcoholic liver disease, sinusoidal, perisinusoidal fibrosis with Mallory
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Yes, Mallory-Denk bodies you are able to see here, canalicular cholestasis, and then lots of steatosis, neutrophilic satellitosis also over here. So this is a case of alcoholic steatohepatitis with cholestasis. So what are the routine challenges which you face while in a routine reporting? So we need to differentiate what is necrosis and fibrosis. Why? So in a disease process where there is a chronicity, where you have to differentiate between a chronic hepatitis or is it an acute exacerbation of a chronic hepatitis, you need to demonstrate necrosis, because that is there in the modified HIS scoring about the confluent necrosis. So for that it is required, and to prevent misinterpretation of acute hepatitis. So calling an acute hepatitis as a fibrosis and a chronic hepatitis is not right. So to avoid that, we'll have to know necrosis. That will be mostly seen in the perivenular area, as I told you, very rarely in the periportal area. And if it is bridging, it will be a central to portal tract bridging only. You can appreciate with the use of Austin stain and the reticulin to see for the collapse of the reticulin fibers. And if it's a fibrosis, it can be periportal or it can be perivenular. Periportal, as in cases of viral, biliary, or drug-induced, and perivenular, it can be an ALD, NASH, or other drugs also, as I told you, in other conditions which I had previously listed out. And it can be a portocentral or a portoportal bridging. It can be highlighted using the trichrome stain, reticulin, and Austin, which will show the presence of elastic fibers. In necrosis, there will be absent, here it will be present. So this is how we will be able to differentiate between a necrosis and a fibrosis. This is very important for the clinician point of view. So we'll have to differentiate both necrosis and fibrosis. So then acute versus chronic viral hepatitis. This we have discussed a lot of time, but again I'm stressing out that acute will be hepatocellular with or without cholestasis, with a lot of lobular changes, that is disarray, and rosetting with ballooning degeneration, vacuolation, and so on, and necrosis, which will be which can be spotty, or which can be confluent around the terminal hepatic venule. The inflammation can be portal and lobular. So whenever there is a portal inflammation, the inflammation might spill over into the lobules. So one might get confused whether it's an interface hepatitis or not. In certain cases, it is very difficult to differentiate, and we will have to rely on the clinical parameters in such a case. So in a chronic hepatitis, we will have a lot of interface hepatitis, the classic ductular reaction because of the damage of the periportal hepatocytes. And in case of hepatitis B virus infection, you will find ground glass hepatocytes. And the presence of ground glass hepatocytes indicates that the patient is having chronic hepatitis. And any amount of fibrosis, which can be picked up with the reticulin or trichrome, indicates that the patient is having chronic hepatitis. And in case of hepatitis C virus infection, presence of portal lymphoid aggregates indicates it is chronic viral hepatitis. So this is how you can differentiate between acute and chronic hepatitis. Then is between alcoholic steatohepatitis and non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. I think last session we had a question about this. So what is more common in alcoholic steatohepatitis? There can be a alcoholic foamy degeneration, that is that microvesicular steatosis diffuse type. So that might not be seen in all the biopsies. Another thing is that it can have a mixed type of steatosis. There can be macrovesicular, and certain cases can have some amount of microvesicular type also. Then cholestasis is invariably seen with alcoholic steatohepatitis only. If you are having cholestasis in a non-alcoholic state hepatitis, you will have to think of some other condition. Is there any associated autoimmune liver disease, or is it something related to drugs, or there is something of a cholestatic, that is obstruction, or something else? The patient is having sepsis or so on. So, if it is a alcoholic hepatitis, steatohepatitis, you will find cholestasis. Then neutrophilic satelitosis and the Mallory-Denk bodies are more in alcoholic steatohepatitis. Like the case we had just seen, it will be more denser and numerous compared to the NASH. And the perisinusoidal fibrosis, I had already shown you, it will be more dense and thicker, whereas in non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, it will be more slender and thin. Only I'll show you here. There is a feature called sclerosing hyaline necrosis. This is a terminal hepatic venule which has been obliterated because of dense fibrosis, and there will be a lot of ballooned hepatocytes surrounding that with Mallory hyaline. This is called sclerosing hyaline necrosis, which is classic for alcoholic steatohepatitis. And here you are able to find a lot of neutrophilic satellitis. This is all about differentiating between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic type. Then we are going to the alcoholic liver disease important features. The fibrosis here in alcoholic liver disease will be only perivenular and the pericellular type of fibrosis, whereas in NAFLD or the NASH, you can have periportal fibrosis also. I think you can go and refer your book about the NASH scoring system, the NAFLD activity score, where the 1C will have periportal fibrosis also. And in alcohol, abstinence will prevent progression to cirrhosis. If you are able to find something of a periportal fibrosis, you have to think in terms of whether there is a biliary or bile duct etiology, or something like alcoholic pancreatitis, because obstruction and other viral infection, if it is associated with some viral etiology, you will have to exclude that. Then when it comes to NAFLD, you have to remember that presence of ballooning alone indicates that the patient is having steatohepatitis. There might be or might not be lobular inflammation, but usually in a steatohepatitis you will be able to find out some lobular inflammation, but ballooning is the telltale feature for steatohepatitis and not the lobular inflammation. Please keep in mind. And I think you will be remembering the CK8-18 stain, which can be used to highlight the absence or reduction in the staining of the hepatocytes in balloon hepatocytes. If you have a trouble, you can make use of the immunohistochemistry. And fibrosis can be periportal. And when it comes to the NASH scoring, you have to use it only for the grading purpose. It is not used for diagnosis. So, I mean to say that if you are having that probable NASH, diagnostic of NASH, unlikely of NASH, please don't use that. It is only used for grading and it is not used for diagnosis. So this is the scoring I was talking about. So here 1C will have portal or portal fibrosis only, and 2 will have portal and perivenular fibrosis also. Then there is a scoring for alcoholic hepatitis also, but most of the clinicians don't prefer using this. But what they have found out that they have used scoring for fibrosis, bilirubinostasis, that is cholestasis, neutrophilic infiltration, and mitochondria. If there is no mitochondria, it means bad prognosis. If there is severe neutrophilic infiltration, then it means it is a good prognosis. If the neutrophils are mild or absent, it is a bad prognostic indicator. If it is severe, it is a good prognosis indicator. If you are able to see the mitochondria, that like the picture which I had shown you in the previous session, the rod shape within the cytoplasm, then it has a good prognosis. And cholestasis and fibrosis have a bad prognosis. Then when you are having a NASH, sometimes the clinician might write that the ANA is positive, mild ANA positivity, or in certain cases ASMA can also be positive. But we'll have to see that a NASH by itself around 24% of cases can have ANA positivity, and around 14% patients can have ASMA positivity. So you have to look in for other features like a lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate, rosette, emperipolysis, or interface hepatitis if you are thinking of overlap. If not, it can be normally also present in a NASH patient. You can have some positivity of ANA. So be aware of that. Then the challenge is differentiating a protracted hepatitis A infection versus a post hepatitis A viral acute autoimmune hepatitis. So it is a known fact that after an episode of viral hepatitis A virus infection, the patient can develop autoimmune hepatitis because of certain trigger. First of all, in such a case, why there is difficulty is because both of these both of them will can present with similar kind of histological picture with lots of lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate and lobular inflammation damage. In hepatitis A, there will be more of cholestasis, but autoimmune also can have some amount of cholestasis, not so significantly. So it is really a challenge to differentiate. So you have to rely on clinical history. That is important. Serology for hepatitis A will not be helpful because it will be more than 6 months. And then you can ask for a HIV viral RNA result. And main thing is elevated antibody titers, DNA, SMA, LKM, or SLA, and high levels of IgG will favor the diagnosis of an autoimmune hepatitis after an hepatitis A virus infection. So before dealing with another challenge, I'm going to show you a case of a 70-year-old female with raised transaminases and raised ALP. ANA is 4+, AMA is negative, and the other antibody profiles are also negative. Only there is ANA positivity, and there is abnormal cholangiography. Clinical diagnosis is PSC. So here you go, this portal area. You see a lot of lymphoplasmacytic cells over here. Here, this is the portal area, but see over here and see over here. And this is another portal area where you're seeing a kind of a hepatic artery over here, but there is nothing here over here, and there's a lot of inflammatory cells which are going into the lobules. Here again, this is a portal area. I think you're able to see this kind of a sclerotic area with a near destructed bile duct. Any diagnosis for this?
Dr. Nusrat says AIH.
AIH. Is there any other diagnosis, sir?
Anybody would like to take this up?
Please give a look for the history also again. There is an abnormal cholangiography with a clinical diagnosis of PSC, primary sclerosing cholangitis. And you're definitely, as Dr. Nusrat said, you're seeing a lot of inflammation which is spreading into the lobules with interface hepatitis. And
Dr. Anuradha says overlap PSC-AIH.
Exactly. So this is an overlap. Here again, you're seeing there's a lot of destruction of this bile duct, and there's a portal area which is showing complete sclerosis. There is no bile duct at all. So this is an AIH-PSC overlap. So I'll be talking about overlap phenomenon. When we are dealing with a pediatric patient of sir, is it fine to continue? Because there are a lot of slides I have to cover. Is it fine, or is everyone tired? I don't know.
Let's take a poll call.
Sorry?
We can take a call from everybody. We can have a third session also at a different date. Let's ask everybody if everybody wants to continue or we want to stop here. Please give your opinion. Dr. Anuradha says continue. Dr. Manoj says continue. Everybody says continue. So please
Exactly.
continue.
So I'll go there. Great.
Go
Gives
ahead.
me a lot of enthusiasm. So I'll go ahead.
Yeah, please.
So in pediatric patients with the clinical AAH, clinically, if the pediatric patient is AAH, and histologically also you're finding features of AAH, you have to consider, look for features of primary sclerosing cholangitis, because in pediatric there is a condition called autoimmune sclerosing cholangitis, and more patients of clinical AAH will show some features of primary sclerosing cholangitis as well. So for diagnosis of overlap, first you need to have classical features of autoimmune hepatitis. It is not vice versa. So first you should have classical features of autoimmune hepatitis and then go for the other findings. So I'll show you this image here. So first, as I showed you the simplified scoring with the compatible and the typical features of AIH and other clinical scorings which are available. You have to score that, and you have a probable or a diagnostic AIH. Along with that, if you are finding ALT more than 5 times the upper limit of normal, and then IgG more than 2 times the upper limit of normal, positive. These are the findings for AIH. And if you are having ALP more than 2 times of the upper limit of normal with AMA positivity and IgM, and along with the florid duct lesion, you suspect or you say it is AH PBC overlap. And like this, in this case, which we had just seen, with the classical features of AIH and the typical findings in PSC, mainly the cholangiogram. The cholangiogram should be abnormal to call it as an AH PSC overlap. If the cholangiogram is not abnormal and you are finding something like a small duct type, you can call it as a AH cholestatic. So this is the criteria for AH cholestatic, where the AMA is negative, there is bile duct injury, but the cholangiogram is normal. Here the cholangiogram will be normal. So there is another case, 36-year-old male, cholestasis under evaluation. Okay, I think Dr. Bala, please don't answer for this. Someone else can answer. This is the low power image of the portal area. And again here, this I think I should give equal opportunity for everyone. I think Bala is very much active. So if someone else can answer, so that's why I've told. Please don't mistake me, Bala. And here, this portal area is showing a lot of these inflammatory cells. You see these cells also here. The bile duct showing some destruction. And here again, you see this bile duct, which is showing some kind of reactive changes. And these cells over here, along with these cells, I'll tell you these are eosinophils. So any diagnosis.
Dr. says PBC. Dr. Bhaskar says PBC.
Okay. Anything else with the presence of eosinophils? Definitely, eosinophils can be seen in.
Dr. Anuradha says
drug. Okay, so.
Dr. Manoj DILI.
Sorry.
Dr. Manoj is saying DILI, and
drug-induced liver injury. Fine.
And
okay.
Dr. Shilpi is saying LCH.
Exactly. Who's the doctor?
Dr. Shilpi Thakur.
Okay, Shilpi Thakur. Okay, fine. This is a very good diagnosis. So this is a 31-year-old male who had a history of a lung lesion, and this is the IHC for CD1A, which is showing these cells, and it can show a feature with damage to the bile duct, and radiologically it can mimic a sclerosing cholangitis. So just for an interesting case, I've just shared this, the CD1A IHC and then cyclin D1 IHC showing the positive Langerhans cell histiocytes. And these are the eosinophils which are seen over here, and these are the Langerhans cell histiocytic cells. maybe you're not able to clearly appreciate. I think that is the reason. But have this in mind if you're finding a kind of a portal-based inflammatory cell and those cells are looking a bit abnormal, you can think of this. Certain cases like mastocytosis also can, systemic mastocytosis also can involve the liver, so keep that in mind as well. So many a times we are left like this after seeing the liver biopsy. There is no clinical history which will help us in any way. So I just asked my friend, so before taking this presentation, I asked the doctor whether anything in particular is required for protein reporting. He told for me it is just cholestasis, some plasma cells, some eosinophils, and mostly the histology and clinical diagnosis will be the same. Some over-the-counter medications, some Ayurveda. So in such a case, then we'll have to think of the magic term drugs. Ask for a complete detailed history. In India, I think we can get drugs over the counter, and it's the patients will usually hide that, and many a times even females, they hide history of taking alcohol. So maybe if you get a chance of going and taking the history from the patient, I think you can do that. So that will be very helpful in making a diagnosis. So what is the role of IHC in a medical liver biopsy? So I had told you about CK7. It will highlight the bile ducts, the ductal reaction, and in case of chronic cholestasis, it will be the periportal hepatocytes which will be stained. And CK19 will highlight only the ducts and the ductal reaction. It will not highlight the periportal hepatocytes. This will not be useful. One of our senior pathologists used to say that when you use CK19, it is more better stain than the CK7 for highlighting the bile ducts, because of the ductal reaction will not be strongly highlighted with CK19, whereas with CK7 the ductal reaction will be more strongly highlighted. So to avoid confusion, you can use CK19 if you suspect a paucity of bile duct. And then CK818 in steatosis or steatohepatitis, also in cholestasis, the ballooning cells will show reduction or absence. In hepatitis, the surface antigen which can show membranous cytoplasmic, core antigen will be nuclear and also cytoplasmic. CMV, HSV, IHEs can be used for amyloid, we can use, and alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency can be used. So the take-home message will be this: it is very interesting and definitely challenging. For acute hepatitis, the histological hallmark will be necrosis and lobular changes. For chronic hepatitis, it will be interface hepatitis and fibrosis. Be cautious while interpreting microvesicular steatosis. Try to get convincing clinical history, whether it's alcohol or some other fatty liver of pregnancy or so on, Ray's syndrome. Maybe nowadays you don't see that, or some other drug induced. And don't confuse them with the small droplet type of macrovesicular steatosis, and give a pattern, whether it's acute hepatitis, chronic hepatitis, whether it's a cholestatic liver disease, or if there is a deposition and so on, and give a probable diagnosis, and accordingly for the pathology you can grade and stage. Don't forget to do this. Ask for detailed drug, alcohol, and native medication. That is a major problem nowadays. There are very good Ayurveda practitioners, but at the same time there are quacks also in their side. So maybe the patient might be hiding that history, so we'll have to ask for that. I always keep a handbook, liver biopsy handbook, by sure to while reporting a liver biopsy. So that is very helpful. So for the exam goings, I would say that you don't have to worry about this presentation if you are getting some really challenging cases. You will be getting classical cases with proper clinical history and proper biochemical parameters, but you will have to be well aware of the clinical history and other serological and biochemical parameters before arriving at diagnosis. Just read the history properly, come to a conclusion of what you are going to deal with under the microscope, and then give a pattern and the probable diagnosis. And what all you will get? You can get an AH, autoimmune hepatitis. Do a histological score where it is compatible or typical. If it is chronic, you can use the grading and staging like the modified HAI also. And in chronic hepatitis, it will be mostly viral. So you have to grade and stage. Don't forget to do that. If you're not going to do that, then you're going to lose marks. Then PBC and PSC, I think the slides would have helped you. NASH, if you are getting it, try to grade and stage. And for NASH and ASH, you have to give a probable diagnosis only. You can't say that it is NASH, even though if the clinical history is like obesity. You suggest that the findings are compatible with the clinical diagnosis of non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, that is with the obesity and so on. Then storage disorders you can get like Niemann-Pick and pouches, amyloid you can get, and rare cases like sickle cell, malarial pigments, and hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. Rarely you can get. You have to look in for the sinusoids for those cells which are the macrophages with the erythrophagocytosis. I would like to thank my friend Dr. Abhijit Chowgli and Dr. Subhradeep Mitra for providing with some good challenging cases for this presentation. And as per the one of our doctors had asked to talk about the nodules, dysplastic nodules. Should I go with this?
There are some questions which is there in the chat box. I think let's take that first.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there are questions. Let me go one by one. So first, let's go with Dr. Navanita Das. She has two questions. First, she says, so well-defined mass may not be present in a case of LCH.
Definitely. It might not be presenting as a well-defined mass. You are right. Yes.
She also has another question, so I'll finish up with Dr. Navanita Das's question. Your experience with herb or Ayurvedic medicines causing liver injury, is it significant in its relation to drug-induced liver injury?
Please, once again. Can you tell me once again? I'm not. Yes.
Experience with herb or Ayurvedic medicine causing liver injury.
Yeah, I've got quite a lot of cases which we have reported as herbal or Ayurveda-induced liver injury. Mainly those which have been, the patients who are getting the drugs from the coax. So, they do not stop the medication at that time. Maybe they think that, okay, this is just being, naturopathy and everything is natural. They start consuming a lot of drugs. And the changes are not so specific. And still, till now, we have not able to come to a specific pattern of liver injury when it comes to Ayurveda. There are a lot of heavy metals, there are certain toxins, maybe steroids which can cause bland cholestasis, and vitamin A which can cause a lot of sinusoidal fibrosis. Some can cause a lot of oils which can cause steatosis and steatohepatitis pattern. So it is quite varied and challenging, and in a proper clinical setting with the absence of other supportive evidences for a particular pathology, we'll have to consider the Ayurveda or a herbal medication induced if the patient is taking a significant quantity of those drugs. Is it fine?
Yeah, there is. She also has a very good comment. She says, for an Indian students, it is important to know about granulomas in liver. That can also be an exam slide.
Yeah, correct. Tuberculosis.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's go to the next part. The next question is Dr. Satyendra. Should LCH always be in the DD of drug-induced liver injury?
Yes, as I said, in the proper clinical setting, like if you are having an acute hepatitis where all the workup is completely negative, you do not have a diagnosis to arrive at, and you are doing a copper stain, and you are doing studies for even the copper excretion and the copper dry weight, and you're not able to come to a conclusion of anything. So we will have to work up for a drug also. So it might be an over-the-counter allopathic medication, or it could be an Ayurveda medication. So there is a site called LiverTox. I don't know if it's currently not working. I don't know why, what happened, but it's a nice website, LiverTox. So you just have to type in the drug which has been taken, not the herbal medication, and it will give the changes which we will be able to see. The commonly seen changes will be given, and what kind of pattern it can present, like is it a steatohepatitis or acute hepatitis or a chronic hepatitis. It'll give complete details about that. And I think, yes, this will be fine, I guess.
There is
So
another question by Dr.
Yeah.
Sonal. Dr. Sonal says, can you please explain CK8 and 18 in ballooned hepatocytes
So
and
I
balloon
think I will
degeneration?
go to the correct. I will go to the slides before.
And she also has a parallel question saying, is confluent necrosis and collapse are they the same?
Exactly. So you will get collapse of reticulin fibers in necrosis, and it happens only in confluent necrosis.
Yeah.
So the significance of which will be useful when you demonstrate the bridging. If it is not bridging, then you will not have confusion. If it is bridging, then you will have confusion whether it is fibrosis or necrosis. So that is when you will make use of the trichrome stain or the reticulin stain or the Orsin stain. In reticulin, you will demonstrate collapse of the reticulin fibers. Orsin, there will be lack of elastic fibers. Trichrome will be very faint in early fibers. Yeah. So this is ballooning. So you are able to see the enlarged edematous hepatocyte with a lot of these Mallory hyaline, and this is called ballooning of the hepatocytes. Please have this terminology fixed. Don't call it as ballooning degeneration, because ballooning degeneration we say it for an acute hepatitis, and I'll show you that also. So for steatohepatitis or a chronic cholestasis, you will have this kind of ballooning, and when you do a CK818 staining, like here, you are able to see the positivity of the hepatocytes here, brown stain, and the Mallory hyalins are also stained here, but the hepatocytes have not taken, the cytoplasm have not taken the stain. So this is, even the bile ducts have taken the stain, but the hepatocyte of this, which contains the Mallory hyalin or the ballooned hepatocytes, have not taken a stain. So this is the ballooning of the, this is the, I think if the doctor has missed out the previous session, this is megamitochondria, which you will frequently see in alcoholic hepatitis. You can also see that in non-alcoholic hepatitis, also in Wilson's disease also you can see that. And ballooning degeneration is in acute hepatitis. You will see the cytoplasmic vacillation, and it will be granular. See there, you see that the single cord pattern might be lost because of the steatosis which has happened within the cell, but here it is because of the damage, lot of inflammatory cells which are inside. This is a plasma cell, this is a lymphocyte, this is a plasma cell, and there is damage and destruction of the hepatocytes, and there is regenerative activity wherein this hepatocytes form a rosette like appearance, and this is a rosette of hepatocytes, and this is ballooning degeneration which happens in acute hepatitis, and a CK818 will be normal in such a condition. Is that clear?
Yeah, I think that's very clear. Dr. Nusrat also has a comment saying that for LCH, age is also important.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely not. It can happen anytime. It's pediatric. I've seen in a 6-year-old child where it was missed out in the biopsy earlier, and then later in the liver biopsy it was picked up.
If there are no comments, we can go ahead with the last part.
Yeah. So yeah, this
Sir,
is also.
Yeah, there's a question.
Please.
Sir, the initial image of the section 2 cases, case 1 and case 2, which you showed, Sometimes it will be difficult to distinguish between EHBA and congenital hepatic
Exactly. So that
fibrosis.
is the reason I had shown you that. Uh, History is very important in that case. But I think in congenital hepatic fibrosis, the hepatocytes will be absolutely normal. And in EHBA, you will be able to demonstrate some amount of hepatocellular changes like multinucleation, uh, cytoplasmic cholestasis, canalicular cholestasis also, and the ballooning changes which can happen. What is your comment about that, Dr. Bala?
Yes, sir. One issue is like that we have the cholangitic variant of CHF, and
Yeah, correct.
which
Yes,
can
yes.
really confuse with EHB. Is there any clue in the my doubt was, is there any, when there is cholangiolar proliferation in
Mhm.
EHBA versus CHF, is there a variation in the how does it in the center of the portal tract and the periphery of the portal tract? Something, any subtle changes are there, sir? In that case of situation, how do you go about when you get, the features are overlapping? How do you, if there is the
Yeah,
HIDA scan is
yeah.
not contributory or something like that? How do you
Correct.
go ahead
Yes.
with those type of challenging cases?
Yeah. So in that particular case, what I will do is I will have to rely on the collagen in the portal tract. So here, as you said, though there will be inflammation, I don't think so. It will be loose as we see it in a EHBA. It will be more dense along with inflammation, like what we see here. Definitely inflammation will be there, but it will be denser, the collagen. Whereas here, even if you see in the trichrome, this is more pale, and here it is more dense, but here it is more pale. So I think that will be helpful to differentiate those two patterns. And definitely we'll have to rely on the clinical and radiological picture.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Welcome, welcome. Yes, sir. Should I go on with the
Nusrat has a comment.
hello?
Say that ubiquitin can be done for MDB.
Yeah, ubiquitin. We routinely don't do that. It's not required. Also, it's quite obvious with HNE, and if you really have a doubt, you can do a cytokeratin 7 or sorry 818. That will be helpful. So I don't think so. You need that. So just proceed on and just to take that. Yeah. So. I've not added this earlier, so I've just added this today in the morning for the nice doctor who had asked to explain the dysplastic focus also. Dysplastic nodule. So here there are certain terminologies. So dysplastic focus, dysplastic nodule, and small HCC. So these are the three things which we will be, means if it is a nodule with more than 2 centimeter and it is hypervascular radiologically, you don't need a biopsy, and with the advanced imaging techniques, so they don't need to confirm with a core biopsy. So if at all, if there is a small nodule less than 2 centimeter, so means there are chances of getting radiologically it might be challenging. So first we'll deal with the dysplastic focus, that is cluster of hepatocyte which is less than 1 millimeter in size, which is characterized either by a small cell change or a large cell change. I'll be talking about that later. And dysplastic nodule is that there is a distinct nodular lesion which has and is bulging out from the surface. It is a dysplastic nodule and gross appearance, and the cytological appearances I'll be discussing. And HCC, small HCC are of two types, early HCC or a progressed HCC. So the size will be less than equal to 2 centimeters. So this is how it goes. It starts with chronic liver disease, and there will be dysplastic foci, mainly the small cell change. The small cell change is very important, and large cell change, not like the other areas where we have the bizarre looking nucleus. Definitely not be large and bizarre looking, but the larger size doesn't have much significance compared to the small cell change, and it will transform to a early hepatocellular carcinoma or progressed HCC or this dysplastic foci, which is at the less than 1 millimeter size, can progress on to dysplastic nodule and then later on to HCC or a progress HCC. So in a dysplastic nodule, as I said, that its gross appearance will be bulging and will be different in color from the other surrounding parenchyma. It can be seen in certain cases without cirrhosis also, chronic liver disease without cirrhosis. So the color and texture is important. Nodules mostly measure about 1 centimeter, but less than 1.5 centimeter. Can be single or multiple. So this is a dysplastic nodule in a cirrhotic liver. It is a big nodule and it is distinct. Color-wise, it is having a pale appearance compared to the other parenchyma. So how are dysplastic nodules classified? They are divided into low grade and high grade depending on the degree of atypia. So what are the things we have to look for? So grossly and radiologically, you have to look for a distinct nodule, and then atypical architectural features. That is, there are two types. That means first you will have to look for the architecture, and then you have to look for the cytological changes, and then there are non-parenchymal changes also. First, in the atypical architecture, you will have to look in for nodule and nodule pattern. That image I'll show you. And then pseudoglandular acinar formation, which is typical of hepatocellular carcinoma. I think most of you who have seen a case of HCC would have seen that. And thickened trabecular, that is the single cord pattern. Instead of that, you have more than up to 3 cell thick the cord pattern will be there. And cytologically, it will be a focal or a diffuse small cell change. I think that is very important. And in a case where there is iron overload, a nodule which is iron free is also considered as a cytological change. And then focal steatosis with Mallory-Dug bodies. The surrounding parenchyma is completely fine, and then you find a nodule with steatosis with Mallory-Dug bodies, you will have to consider it as a dysplastic nodule, provided there are other supportive evidences. Then in coming on to the non-parenchymal changes, you will have to demonstrate unpaired arteries. What do you mean by unpaired artery? I think we've discussed in the previous slides that the hepatic artery is a muscular structure, will be associated with a bile duct, and in the portal area it will have the portal vein also. So in this, they will not be associated with anything. It will be just sitting in the center of the parenchyma. So presence of an unpaired artery will signify a dysplastic nodule. It can be better visualized using a endothelial marker or a smooth muscle marker, SMA. And the least prominent in low-grade dysplasia is both number and in size. Then what you will have to look is for the portal tracts. So the portal tracts are commonly seen in dysplastic nodule, but they are few and less in number in low-grade dysplasia compared to that of the high-grade dysplasia. So in a nodule, if you are able to see a normal portal tract, it can be present in a dysplastic nodule, and it is more commonly seen with a low-grade dysplastic nodule than a high-grade dysplastic nodule. So this is a low-grade dysplastic nodule, which will show that apart from the small cell changes, you can have a lot of other changes also. There will be clear cell changes, eosinophilic changes, and diffuse iron or copper accumulation, and then uniform steatosis in livers without fatty change. That is, that if there is no fatty change, and if that particular nodule is showing a lot of steatosis, then also you have to consider as a clonal change. And cytological changes might be mild. That is, it will be usually a large cell change than the small cell change, but definitely you might be able to find some small cell change also. And architectural changes are little bit more than a regenerative feature, but there is no gland formation, and all pseudoglandular acinar formation is not a feature of low-grade dysplasia. And the risk of developing HCC in a low-grade dysplasia is negligible. So you don't have to worry if it is a low-grade dysplastic nodule. So here you can see a clear demarcation with the surrounding nodule, and the cell thickness is comparatively more than here. The cell size also is a bit smaller compared to this. here this is a large cell change where there is a low cytoplasmic nuclear cytoplasmic ratio with increase in nuclear size with prominent nucleoli. This is considered as a large cell change, and previously it was thought of having a risk of progression to HCC, but nowadays it doesn't have. And high-grade dysplasia is very significant. We have to see for the features, that is the presence of small cell change and focal large cell change which can be present, and clonal changes, that is the clear cell change resistant to iron accumulation. That iron accumulation will not be there, and fatty change will be focally present with Mallory-Denk bodies. And architecturally, there can be pseudoglandular, a trabecular pattern, acinar pattern, and there will be thickened cord pattern. So there will be up to 3 cord thick it will appear, and nodule and nodule appearance. So low-grade dysplasia will show large cell change, and there will be no pseudoglandular or acinar pattern. And though you can have some clonal changes like fatty change, and there can be iron accumulation also in that compared to the other nodules like that. But here it will be more of a small cell change in high-grade dysplasia, more of a small cell change, more of pseudoglandular formation, and less of portal tracts, which I told you, more of unpaired arteries compared to that of low-grade dysplasia. So these are the features we will have to consider in for a high-grade dysplasia. So it's a comparison between a low-grade dysplasia. This is a surrounding liver parenchyma, which you are seeing this size, which may be considered as a large cell change, but you just compare the size with this. This is very small compared. The nuclear cytoplasmic ratio is increased here, or the cell size is reduced here compared to that here. The NC ratio is quite high here. Here it is low. This is considered as a small cell change. And like here we see this area which is showing a sudden fatty change, like here, and sudden ballooning with lot of Mallory-Heilin also. So that is also significant and considered to be a clonal feature. And this is what is called the nodule and nodule appearance. I think I told about reticulin earlier. So reticulin will be helpful to highlight this nodule and nodule appearance. And what you can see is the distinct reduction in the reticulin fibers here in this nodule compared to that the surrounding parenchyma. So this might not be seen in all nodules, but it is considered quite significant, with the other definite findings which I will be talking about that later. So in this core also you can see this marked thickening of the cord pattern and small cell change along with the small cell change. Just compare the nuclear cytoplasmic ratio from here to here, and you see a lot of this pseudoacinar pattern which can be seen over here. Again, these are the unpaired arteries which are more prominent in a high-grade dysplastic area. So next is the IHC staining, where CD34 comes. I think initially while describing about the normal histology, I had told you that these endothelial cells which are lining the sinusoids will be stained negative. Maybe few lobules occasionally here and there can show CD34 positivity, but not in a normal liver. Means in a normal liver, occasionally it can show, but not diffusely. Whereas in low-grade dysplasia, the capillarization of sinusoids can be focal. It will be more extensive in high-grade dysplasia, and it will be marked in hepatocellular carcinoma. And when we take a small cell hepatocellular carcinoma, so now after the dysplastic change, you are going to a small cell carcinoma which is less than 2 centimeters. And there are two types here. One is the early HCC, next is the progressed HCC. So we have troubles only with the early HCC, because progressed HCC, it's very easy to pick up because it looks like a moderately differentiated hepatocellular carcinoma with the classical architectural as well as cytological changes, and there will be no problem in diagnosing a progressed HCC. Whereas in early HCC, you have two kind of appearances. It can be a well-formed nodule, or in most cases, it will be a kind of a vague nodule. So And the early HCC has marked overlapping with that of a high-grade dysplastic nodule. So you have to use various stains and histological markers to come to a diagnosis. But the important feature is the presence of stromal invasion. So there will be a portal area which will be showing tumor cells infiltrating the stroma. So that will prove that the particular nodule is an early HCC and not a high-grade dysplasia. So that particular portal area should be devoid of ductal reaction. So for that, you can use a CK7 and 19 or a CK19 IHC to demonstrate that the ductal reaction is absent. And reticulin stain here also will be decreased, but it is not confirmatory. So here this is showing this classic small cell change with this beautiful acinar pattern. And this is that portal area within that nodule, and that portal area is showing infiltration of these tumor cells into the stroma, and this is considered to be a definite sign of early HCC. If you are not able to find this, or if you find a lot of ductal reaction, it might be an entrapped hepatocyte and not a true infiltration. So you have to look in for that. And for progressed HCC, it is a distinctly nodular lesion, and the features are a moderately differentiated HCC. It can be an expanding or infiltrating type. And CD34, the previous image which we saw will show marked capillarization with the diffuse positivity in the sinusoid, and there will be more unpaired arteries. So singly lying unpaired arteries will be present, and you don't have to think about portal tracts because here it will be absent. And it shows a lot of invasion and invasion in the portal vein also. So this will not be a problem histologically. Radiologically, again, here this lesion is going to be hypovascular, whereas the other lesions are going to be because they have less amount of unpaired arteries, they are going to be hypovascular or isovascular. So radiologically, again, it might be a problem. We need to use the histology to make a diagnosis. Then coming on to the IHC. So like I said, glypican 3 will be very useful to demonstrate a dysplastic nodule. That will be typically cytoplasmic, but it can be a membranous or a canalicular staining. And in 69% of cases of well-differentiated HCC, it will be positive. 81% of more poorly differentiated will be positive. Whereas in 9% of high-grade dysplastic nodules only will be positive for the glypican 3. So you can make use of this if you have confusion. And you have to use it as a panel with the glutamine synthetase. Glutamine synthetase is normally expressed in the terminal, that zone 3 hepatocytes, and diffuse and strong staining has significance, and it is seen more commonly with a poorly differentiated and a well differentiated HCC. And HSP70 also can be useful, and it is a nuclear and cytoplasmic stain, and it is more commonly seen with a well differentiated or a moderately differentiated, poorly differentiated, moderately differentiated HCC, and not seen with the dysplastic nodule. Normally, these hepatobiliary cells of the ductal reaction can be used as an internal control while using HSP70. What you have to do is you have to see in for the histological picture, CD34 IHC, and other these three markers to come to a diagnosis. The main problem will be differentiating high-grade dysplastic nodule from a early HCC. So as I said, you can make use of the infiltration into the portal area as a marker of early HCC, and the other changes will almost be similar between the high-grade dysplasia and the early HCC. So this is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajaguru. There is a question by Dr. Bhaskar Mitra. You can stop sharing your screen so then you can see your face now. So Dr. Bhaskar Mitra was asking, kindly explain stromal invasion. That is the infiltration
Yes.
of the dysplastic hepatocytes into the periportal area.
Not periportal area. Maybe it can be into the periportal area also, but this portal tract is not the portal tract which is surrounding the nodule. It is incorporated within the nodule.
Within,
So
within
you
the
will
substance of the
have to-
nodule.
within the substance of the nodule. So
Yeah,
you will have
yeah.
to see the cells infiltrating into the portal area which is within the nodule.
Right. Now, let me just tell you the comments. Dr. Nabanita Das says, extremely well and thoughtful, handcrafted presentation, immensely benefited and refreshed. Thank you very much. A wonderful session, Dr. Rajaguru. It was mammoth, 2 hours of continuous teaching. You must be really tired. And thank you very much for such a wonderful
I'm happy to
presentation.
do that.
I think everything is crystal clear. And we will not let you go. Maybe we'll catch you again for small GI biopsies, and maybe sometime later on some interesting case presentations on liver biopsies.
Sure.
Maybe sometime later. Anybody has
Yes,
any
sir.
question? Dr. Nabanita says, catch him again. So she doesn't want you to go. She wants you back on this forum, and I think you will surely be back, I bet.
Next week.
Yeah, maybe we'll give you some breathing time. Yeah, and
Definitely.
fine. Before we close the session, let me share my screen. You can stop presenting, Dr. Bhaskar, so that I can share. You can just exit out.
Yeah, I'll exit.
And Dr. Rajaguru, just can you exit out? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Sure.
So we have this presentation, which is on Sunday, which is a Sunday special, and I would request everybody to join. This is multiple facets of eosinophilic renal neoplasm. This will be Dr. by Sambit Mohanty. And then on Monday, we have the next one, which is Dr. Poonam speaking on the Paris system of reporting urinary cytology. This is these two things on the line. So I hope everybody joins in there. And thank you, Dr. Rajaguru, once again for this extraordinary, wonderful presentation. Thank you all. God bless you. Thank you. Bye.